Luitgard van den Berge, has decided to pass us the torch as the leader of the corporate governance dialogue. But we are very delighted and honored that she is still willing to contribute and participate in this forum. So thank you very much, Luitgard. If I briefly may recall, the corporate governance dialogue is set up as an internal think tank gathering hand-picked experts and experienced board members. The main objectives are to detect new emergent themes, identifying corporate governance trends, and to reflect on the role of tomorrow's board members. In this respect, the corporate governance dialogue strives to reinforce ecoDa's advocacy role by being one step ahead. In the 4th edition today, we will tackle the theme of less hierarchical organizations. The program is structured in 2 parts. In the first part, we will present 2 real-life cases, and therefore we welcome 2 distinguished speakers who really lived the cases themselves. Mrs. Marie Bernard-Guillaume, partner and director of Mercury Urval, and Mr. Mathieu Leclerc, former chair of Decathlon. Marie Bernard and Mathieu, thank you very much for being with us and sharing your experience in a moment. After the testimonials, we will give you the opportunity to ask questions to both speakers on their specific cases. Next, we will start the open dialogue and reflection based on some specific questions that we've prepared for you. And I have the challenging role to be your timekeeper. So before we dive into the cases, I would like to clarify the notion of less hierarchical organizations, as we observe that this term provokes different interpretations and opinions. In fact, it does not mean the same to everyone. Within the context of ecoDa, it all started with a contact with Mr. Jean-François Zobrist, who is well known for being anything but an ordinary CEO of Favi. Favi is a manufacturer and supplier of technical parts for various industries, amongst others the automotive industry. In the 80s, he transformed Favi from a traditional command and control organization to a liberated company based on freedom, trust, and equality. The notion of a liberated company became very popular because of Isaac Getz. He is a well-respected professor and one of the most influential living management thinkers. He wrote a book, L'entreprise libérée, and his work and action have been instrumental to the rise of the corporate liberation movement in Europe. It includes Michelin, Airbus, and several hundreds of other companies and institutions which transformed their command and control organizations into freedom and responsible-based ones. In 2014, Frédéric Laloux, another influential management thinker, published the book Reinventing Organizations, and one of the main pillars in this book is also the notion of self-management. These are only a few examples of how the decision on less hierarchical organizations is driven by an ideology, a conviction, and by some of pioneering individuals. This trend echoes what happened in the 50s in the UK, where miners in South Yorkshire began spontaneously organizing their work by means of autonomous self-steering teams. Self-management teams took different forms and they gained popularity in the 70s and the 80s in Europe, Japan, and the US. The key message from these few examples is that companies are experimenting with new models which moves away from the classical command and control structure with more empowerment and autonomy to the employees, less management layers, the so-called flattening the organization. However, The question arises whether this trend can be considered a hype or not. First of all, many companies are in practice struggling with transforming the organization into a model with autonomous self-steering teams as they face various hurdles. Secondly, companies who started to organize less hierarchical and with more decentralization of authority are reviewing their model and are turning to some extent back the clock. Zapatos is one of the well-studied and often cited examples in this respect. Finally, although best practices examples still exist, and therefore we refer to Morningstar, go back please, Manon, Morningstar, only a very small number of companies follow the examples. So this led Forbes magazine to raise a critical question. If self-management is such a great idea, why aren't more companies doing it? Nevertheless, from a very different perspective, strategic partnerships are emerging as well as the formation of business ecosystems. In Belgium, my home country, recently the spotlights were, for instance, on a new partnership between Belfius, the bank, and Proximus, our telecom company. And finally, for some people, it still sounds like science fiction, but the first decentralized autonomous organization is already founded. This is an organization whose decisions are made electronically by a written computer code or through the vote of its members by means of blockchain technology, completely eliminating governance bodies such as board and management. So far, I presented a brief view of what happens in practice based on some anecdotal evidence. But what about academic research on this topic? And there are two seminal articles that I would like to point out and is worth mentioning for this meeting. A first article dates already back from the 1997, and it shows already that the interest in less hierarchical organization is not new. It exists already for more than 20 years and even beyond. The striking observation at that time is, thus mentioned the quote here on the slides. 21st century organizations will require designs that enable them to cope with hyper competition, radical changes in technology, and new workforce values. Organizations have experimented with lateral organizational designs, but research evidence concerning these forms is sparse. And this article on your left side on the slide is one of the scarce empirical large studies that provides insights into the cost, the benefits, and the enablers of the so-called lateral organizational designs. A second article that I would like to mention is more recently by two Harvard professors who were very inspired by the examples of Sabatos and Morningstar, the ones that I also presented to you. And they conducted a literature review on non-hierarchical organization. And actually they came to the same remarkable observation or conclusion, is that actually our understanding and knowledge on non-hierarchical organization is still very limited. Nevertheless, various articles and papers are discussing recent trends that highlight the limitation of the managerial hierarchy within modern organization. And these trends are listed here on the next slides. They are referring to changing customer expectations, changing regulation and market dynamics, the influence of new tech and rapid technological evolutions, the growth in knowledge-based work, viewing work and organizations as places for personal meaning for the millenniums, the next generations, the societal challenges, and on top of this, the COVID-19 crisis. So what does this all mean for corporate governance? it is clear that when we talk about less hierarchical organizations, it merely denotes a managerial and HR perspective. Nevertheless, in preparing this meeting and reading through all the material, I could identify some common governance denominators as they popped up in each case. Leadership is key, redesigning reward systems, and clear roles and responsibilities. These three recipes are not unknown from a corporate governance perspective, but it is for sure that they got a new meaning within the context of less hierarchical designs. But I assume there are more ingredients to be found. So Marie Bernard, please, you have the floor for presenting the first real-life case study. Thank you. Marie, are you still with us?
Of course, if I put my mute, it won't work. So yes, I'm there. Can you see me also? It's fine? Okay. I see you have some slides, but I will not especially follow them, but never mind. Let's see where it leads. Maybe 2 words about me. I'm a consultant in Mercury Urval for 20 years now. I've been in the past for 10 years in international business. And for 20 years in Mercury Urval, I'm today partner and director, quite busy with the healthcare sector, hospital, but also the public sector, and quite busy also with leadership, development of potential of the people, being myself a certified coach. Regarding governance, I've been certified by Guberna, so I know, and I'm very much interested in governance because I think it's about doing the right things and doing it right. And also I'm quite involved in all this new, could we say, movement of style of leadership. I'm involved in a task force in Belgium, which is also spreading and informing different CEO about this new style of governance, or at least leadership, or the ways of doing. So that's about me. Now regarding Mercury Urval, in a nutshell, what do? We are helping our customer to have the right people at the right place, because we strongly believe that you may have the best strategy as possible, you may have the best tool in the world, but if you don't have around the table the right leaders and the right capabilities and behavior, then you will never achieve the results you want to achieve. And that's why we say it on a very simple way, it's all about people. And we do exist, and that's our purpose, is really to help our clients to put the right capabilities in place and to get the best possible results. This being said, my idea was, and maybe we don't need to put the slides for the moment, but my idea was to just draft the history of Mercury Urval so that you can understand where this transformation process came and what happened. And then I will dig a little bit more about the stepstones we followed and talk more about also the governance, which is today in place in this new style of what I call self-governed or non-hierarchical company. I will also sum up what are the basic transformation we can see very pragmatically, and then what are the roses and the thorns of such an organization, because it's never, of course, pink. There is also some shadow, and luckily there is always something to improve. Just briefly, the history. For those who don't know Mercury Urval, we are a Swedish company. We are an executive search firm and talent advisory firm. I guess we are one of the rare ones which are coming from the Nordic and which are international. And we were created in '67 by Håkan Eriksson, who realized that to improve the results of the client, it's important to place the right people at the right place, as I said, and to build a tool, an assessment tool, which helps the client, which help us to predict the individual success in a specific job. Just to analyze what will be the potential of that person if I put that person in such environment. And you know, people is a bit like flowers. Some flowers likes to be in the sun, some flowers prefer being in the shadow, some flowers prefer having a lot of water, some don't. And therefore it's quite important to understand who you place in which type of culture and environment. And therefore, we were pioneer in assessment. Later on, we developed our services because our client asked us more, and then we started to do recruitment and selection, and later on we came up to executive search, where we stand today. We did also extend our tools and in order to become a talent advisor. So we had different tools such as coaching, capability review, talent management, detecting IPO, and so on. And we progressively, from 67 to the 90s, we progressively grow also on an international point of view. And it's an organic growth, meaning that everybody in every country had the same philosophy. And we could say by the end of the 90s that even if we were in different countries, we had somehow the same values and same way of working or objective. I forgot to say that in a Nordic company like Mercury Urval, what matter is also the bottom line. So what is the profit? And we get, since the beginning, lots of autonomy, lots of responsibility and self-management as far as we reach the target and the profit, which sounds quite healthy, I would say, for a company. But growing more and more, and in around 2000, we were in 27 countries. We were with 27 subsidiaries, 27 managing director, and 27 boards, and each of them having quite a high freedom. So it was a kind of 27 kingdom, and everybody had the freedom to decide on its own. And we could see, and the owner could see that from a country to another one, they might have some different culture, different value. And he realized that each one was more interested by his own country results or profit, rather than having a real Mercury Urval objective, a common goal. Another thing that came also on the table beside this individualism, I would say, was also the fact that there was a lack of clear direction, and that's certainly linked to that. There were no real cooperation between the people, although we knew we were international, we knew our colleagues were working the same way as we were doing, but there were no tools that help us to that. There were no IT tools or common database, and it was not the real international company we wanted to be at the time. It was more in the title than pragmatically in the daily life. The other things was also that this model, as you can imagine, being in having 27 kingdom is a quite heavy model once you have to face a crisis. And the world became more and more VUCA. Of course, this type of model also was very heavy in terms of cost, because each country has its own CFO, assistant, and heavy office cost and so on. And there were no synergy on a group level. And the third point, which was also important in this, beside this kingdom, lack of direction, heavy cost model, not very agile, there was also the threat in terms of product is that the recruitment and selection in the way we were doing at that time was called to be disappear on longer term. And our owner is somebody who is quite visionary and is always thinking about what's going to happen in 10 years time from now. And he was aware that this type of services we were offering to our client had a great added value at that time, but in 10 years time, the client will probably do it by themselves. There will be much more competition. We will run into a model which is no cure, no pay, which is really not our way of working. And therefore it was time to think about how are we still going to help our client and bring added value to the client. We were also afraid that some country could have shrunk and that we would have only a few consultants per country, whereas we had this rich and wealthy positioning of being at the same time international and very strong regionally. So how to keep those both added value we could bring. It's difficult to change such an organization, of course. And what I find clever, because I'm there for 20 years, so I could see some trends over there. In the 2000, Håkan Eriksson, the owner, decided to launch a spin-off, a kind of spin-off, we could say, which was Advice Executive Firm, which was a real headhunting company firm that he created so that it was a good way for him to test the market, to understand better this type of product, and to see if this executive search approach has a future, and if we could move the company from what I would say a more traditional recruitment selection company with advert, with database, with this type of approach of the candidate market towards a much more hunting approach on the market, and was quite difficult to change a consultant internally to move towards this type of services. That's why he tested it out through this spin-off he created. And I find that quite clever because it helps the company on the journey later on when we had to move towards executive search. Now, what helped also the company at a certain stage is that in 2008, there was this crisis, and as Winston Churchill say, never waste a good crisis. Then it was a good timing. It was the perfect storm to break the habits and the various kingdom. And that's where we started, I would say, and we could see really the journey starting. We had the introduction of what I would call one CFO for the whole group, which created what we called the Shared Service Center. And it was all about moving the financial service to Sweden so that we had just one financial service for the whole company. And that was already quite a drastic change in the organization. I'll came later on to some of the stepstone. I don't know if I will be able to share my screen instead of sharing this PowerPoint you had, Abel. I don't know if you can give me the floor for that later on, because I could show maybe some interesting things. I don't hear, maybe you're on mute, never mind. To go on with the story, in 2016, the owner decided to give the company to a foundation. That's something which is quite common, as far as I understood, in the Nordic countries, and I think also in Holland. He gave the company to the foundation, the Stiftelsen Mercury Urval, and the role of the foundation is to make sure that Mercury Urval is sustainable. The foundation holds 100% of the share, and the will of the owner was also that the company could belong to the people. He wanted the company to be much more based on meritocracy and giving the ability to the people who were the most performing consultant to become part of the shareholders. So that was one of the will he gave to the foundation when he did this. And that's where we also went on in the journey. So in the first year, there were no such CEO, but there was a board, which was made with the talent manager, Richard Moore, who became later on this year the CEO of the company. There was Roger Aggerford, who is the president of the board today, and who was the psychologist who at the very beginning and the foundation of the company did put in place and created these assessment tools we have. And Okan, the founder, before giving the company, of course, was also in the board. And it's those three people who did really think the whole transformation process. What they've been inspired with, and I'll try to share, let's see if it's working. They were inspired by, do you see this or not?
Not yet, Marie.
Okay, let me come back on this and see. Voila, do you see this?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So they rethink the whole transformation, and they've been inspired not by the people you mentioned before, Abby, but by this agile principle that I put here on your screen. You can Google and find them out later on Google, but these were the things they always keep in mind to build up the transformation process. What was also the transformation on that point of view was that instead of having this 27 kingdom, they decided to put in place a very agile group of team. So we have about, or we had, I don't know today, but we should be between 60 and 7 teams all around the world, with the team leader at the top of each team. And the role of the team leader is to coach and help every consultant to be successful in what he does. And the role of the team leader is to make sure that he is the guardian of the values and the mission and the objectives of the group and the alignment with the group. So that's where this agile transformation happened. So that's something that they put in place. And also they really thought carefully about what would be the different step. And I'm going to show you this slide. Hopefully you see it.
Yes,
Yes,
perfect.
okay. So the purpose today is not to go into details, but what I want to show you through this slide is that when you want to start such a transformation process journey, there is no model. You need to be agile, but you need to be quite well structured. You need to know why you do it, and you know where you want to be. So they put in place those different stepstones here. The first one, as you may understand, was first we need to really work on making Mercury Urval being one company and not 27 different companies, one next to each other. And afterwards, there has been different projects and different steps, such as having a better talent management strategy, centralizing all the recruitment. So at a certain point, every new consultant coming in the company had to go through assessment and also to be seen by the talent manager of the group. So we were sure that, you know, recruitment, for instance, there was an alignment also with what the group was willing to have and with the profile we are searching for. Because as you can imagine, having a profile in such agile organization is different than what you can have in any kingdom or hierarchical organization. Then, of course, you need to work on the process, on the standard, you need to work on the knowledge sharing, you need to work on the digital. But it's interesting to see how well structured they've been to put in place this process. And I show you here another way of seeing it is that they had three steps: the business solution, how are we going to move, and what are the different projects we need to put in place to reach our target, what type of people, what do we need to do with the people to reach it, how do we train the people, what are the KPI we need to provide to the key people, and also in terms of system and administration, what are we going to put in place just to have a common way of being. And I left here some that are quite common. How do we make sure the whole company is GDPR? How do we make sure that we have the right application? We put in place a new internet, intranet, new way of communication. So that was some process methodology they did apply to reach this. So as you see, it's not about the model, it's about the journey. And I can tell you also that there were things that were thought at the beginning that has been changing on the way because they realized by measuring that we were not doing the right things. And you need to have also this agility and this ability to switch and to change your project on the road if needed. And it's a very, I would say, figures, facts and figures, data-based, evidence-based reflection that the management and the board had to help this transformation program. So what I want to show you now, maybe it would be interesting, is regarding the governance. How does it look today? I'm sorry, I wanted to put that in a, oops, never mind. I wanted to put that in a slide mode, but I can't see. Do you see it now? Do you see the full screen?
Yes.
What I might do is
No, not the full screen, but we see the slide, Marie.
I will do like this to do. Voila. Do you see it now? I think it's better because it was written in very small. Okay. So how looks the governance today? You've got the foundation, as I told you. So we've got the board of the foundation, which is 3 people. One is a former judge, another one has a strong background in accounting, and the third one in law. So that's the rule of the game in Sweden, as far as I understood. These are the 3 types of profile you need to have to manage the board of the foundation. Then you've got the holding, and the part of the share are in the hands of the partners. So they did create it during this transformation process also a partnership program where, as I said earlier, the top performer consultant could become partner. And there is a selection, of course, for that. And there is, of course, a development plan. If you want to be a partner, there are some rules to follow. And you've got the nomination committee. I'm part of this nomination committee. And the role of this committee is to make sure that the consultants who are proposed to become partner are answering to the right criteria in terms of behavior and in terms of results. And the nomination committee present those candidates to the foundation, and it's up to the foundation to decide about who will become partner or not. Then you got, of course, the board of the company in itself, the Mercury Urval KMR, and you've got all the teams. I wouldn't call that subsidiaries. I would rather call it the teams. It's about the 67 teams I've been telling you about. And I'll show you how this team is constructed. What is interesting here is that you've got also committee, very agile committee. You've got a supervisor committee, the one who is providing the annual report to the partner. But there is also what we call the development committee. And the purpose of those committees is to support the business manager to think on a longer term. Because of course, when you are yourself in the execution, in the executive team, you are very much busy with the operational task, and you may tend, it's very difficult to have a long-term vision. So these committees are there to help the managers wherever they need us to work, and the partners are part of those committees. So this is where the partners can influence the strategy and the vision of the company. It's through those development committees. And for instance, and the thematic of those committees changing every year, depending on the need of the business. So we do have we participate there on a voluntary base. Whoever wants to participate to that or that development committee, door is open. You need, of course, to be partner, to be part of those committees. And for instance, this year, a big issue we will have, we want to recruit much more consultants. So we have a committee. We're thinking about how can we develop and attract more consultants who are aligned with the criteria we need to have. And if I dig into this part here, sorry, this is the role of each board. So of course, the foundation, as I say, is accountable for the sustainability of Mercury Urval, and of course, as all the share. You've got the company board accountable for the operation, as in a normal company, I would say. Same for the CEO and the leadership team. They need to run the operation. The partner are there to get the dividend, but also to participate in the committee, as I've just explained. And now, if we look at the organization, this is the way we present it. It's another way than having this hierarchical way of doing. So 70 teams, 50 offices, and it's quite modern and agile. And this is the way it looks in terms of organigram, where you've got a CEO, of course, you've got a finance, like in any company. We've got a talent manager, which is very important and key because it's all about people, as you know. So he has a lot of data and metrics to measure what makes people successful, and therefore what are the profile we need to have successful consultant, for instance. Then we've got international business manager, which is also important. As you remember, we want to be one Mercury Urval, and one of our added value is to be able to give an international solution to our international clients. And this is where we believe the future will be also for the company. So that's important to have somebody in that role. And then you've got, of course, whatever is about digital, about community manager, about communication. And of course, we need somebody who is quite agile in using all these tools and putting the right tool in place so that we can communicate better internally. And then you've got what's interesting is not sales manager, what we can find in other company, but we have business area manager. We have 4 of them. Each of them has about 15 teams, and each of them is coaching the team leader. So each of them are making sure that the alignment is there in terms of value, in terms of results, in terms of way to do things, in terms of quality, and so on. So this is the structure and the way it is. And again, quite agile because every team has a high autonomy. Every consultant has a high autonomy. But with this type of structure, it's a good way to make sure that the freedom of everybody is well, is in the right frame. And I wanted, I just drop here, it's not complete, and you last question, and I will complete this, but we came, if in a nutshell, I have to summarize this, it was a family governance. We had no formal board. We are the owner at all the figures, But we as consultants, we didn't know what was, maybe we knew the turnover of the company, but it was not much more than that. So that was not very transparent. We had lots of, as I say, 27 kingdom with different layer. We had a European manager, VPs, you had a country manager, you had a CFO, blah, blah, blah. KPI were not very clear, or we had one KPI, which was reach your budget and be profitable. But even then, profitability was different from a kingdom to another one. Everybody has its own definition of the profitability, even when we talk about figures. We were already client-centric, that's for sure. We used the measurement we had. I'm not digging into details, but we had not the right measure to see who was really doing the sales. So the way we measure things was not very clear and transparent to understand who was bringing what as business. There were no common IT tool, ERP. We were Mercury Urval multiple. But what was already there and is still there today, it's the autonomy. It's the possibility for the consultant to develop their knowledge. And it was also about the connectivity and working with the team, which has always been very strong values in Mercury Urval. The quality has been always there and the value also. And now if I have to say today what difference I see as being from inside the company and as a partner, I can see that the governance is much more professional than it used to be. As you've seen now, we do have clear level of governance, clear board, clear election of the board member. We have well-defined governance on this point of view and committee. You've seen the structure. The foundation is also a good tool to make sure that the long-term sustainability is over there. And it makes us feeling safe, because having a foundation who will not sell the company to anybody else, then we feel safe about that. It's a kind of security, which is nice to have somehow. There is lots of transparency. You have to know that today we provide much more figures to everybody. Not only the partners have access to all figures, but I would say every single consultant knows where we stand and what to do to be successful. I talked about the agile teams. There is much more leadership also in the company. And when I say leadership, it's about self-leading first. You need to be entrepreneurial. You've got lots of freedom, but you need to know how to use this freedom. Sometimes it's easier to have somebody to tell you, you do this, and then if there is a mistake, it's not my fault. When you are in a self-leading company, you are accountable for what you do. You cannot tell it's not my fault, it's the fault of somebody else. So that can be stressful. Some people don't like it, but on the other way, it gives you lots of freedom. It's also about leading others, either because you are a partner, either because you're a team leader, but or either because you work in a project with other consultants, you need to know how to lead others and how to lead the clients, of course. And that's about leadership. We have also, I didn't talk so much about it. Abil, tell me if I'm not too long. I forgot to watch. Am I 5 minutes? Okay, that's fine. That's more than enough. I didn't say that, but we don't have title anymore. Of course, there is title, but it's more about the role. What is the role you want to play in the company? And you are not forced to stick to the same role for 20 years. You can become a team leader. If you want to be a team leader, you need first to be a successful consultant. And then you express it to the group saying, I want to become team leader. And then they will provide you with a path of development. You'll follow special training. You'll have your own personal development plan so that you can show you can become a leader, and then you will be nominated as a leader. If you want to become partner, same way. You need to respect certain criteria, but everybody can be a partner. After 3 years in the company and being successful for 3 years, you are already eligible, electable for being a partner, as far as you are a role model too. So you don't need to be 55 years old to become partner. We have partners of 30 years old. And you are partner as far as you are successful. The day you are not anymore, then you may lost also your title of partner. So that's also an agility we have. Meritocracy and accountability are really there. No, it's really present, as you could hear. We have very clear KPI. We have much more dashboard than we used to have in the past. And we even have our own individual dashboard. So at any time we know where we stand towards our budget, towards the objectives we have, and we can compare with the others, and we know where the company is compared to the global target. So in a one shell, nutshell, we know where the company is and where do I stand in the company. The quality was there, as I say, but now there is much more tools to prove that the quality is there. We check it through different ISO certification, through client survey, customer survey, employee survey. We know also better who is doing what. And we are clearly now ME1, or we are at least much further in that journey than we used to be. And we are much more agile. Digitalization is there. I'm very happy that 3 weeks before the COVID crisis, we had implemented already the tools teams, and we had lots of agile tools, which were very easy for us from day 1 to day 2 to work from home and to go on with usual business. And then we also recruited expertise where it needs to be. And for instance, in our case, we have a CFO who is really expert and who has faced different crises. And he arrived in the company last year, and that was a very good asset during this crisis because he has the right maturity and expertise to face this and to help us. Autonomy, development, connectivity is still there. Qualities and values are still there. So Abby, do you want to, should I stop here or should I draft the roses and the thorns?
Yeah, sure, you have still
conclude.
3 minutes, Marie.
Sorry?
Yeah, sure. What are the lessons learned?
Yes.
In a nutshell.
Right. So the roses today, as you understood, is really, and that's what the people liked when they come here. We do have a very high freedom. Nobody is asking me where I am today and what I'm doing. I can be at home, I can be at the beach, or it doesn't matter. Nobody's asking me as far as I'm bringing the results and respect the objective I have. We can develop our own talent. And as I say, it's a carrière sur mesure. Transparency, we have a fair game, you need to play it fair. Fair game, fair play, it's about that. So it's not total freedom, there is a game and there are the rules of the game. More agility, more entrepreneurship. We've got a clear reward system based on the results. So meritocracy, as I explained earlier. The partnership also based on results and behavior, and the governance as also is agility, as I explained. Now the thorns in this is that not everybody can live in such organization because you have to put the pressure on yourself. It's up to you, actually. So using that freedom can be sometimes tiring because it's easier to do what you're asked to do instead of having your own enterprise inside the enterprise. It's not easy to find such profile, as you can imagine. So the selection is very long and very sharp. There are still some shadow zone in the reward system. So when you work in a team, it's always difficult to see where is the borderline, what is your added value compared to the other one and who has done more. So whatever system you have, there will be always somebody complaining. I think since I'm in Mercury Urval, I get to know 5, 6 rewarding system. And each time there were somebody not happy with it, but I think that's part of this type of business. The behavior is not included. So you are not rewarded because you behave well. You are in the company and you stay in the company because you behave well. So it's not rewarded. And sometimes, and that's all about leadership, it's not easy to make sure that everybody is a role model, that everybody as this team spirit is acting for the goodwill and the good of the company instead of his own good. So there again, we may struggle with certain profile. What we still need to improve is also the accountability, meaning that you should not blame anyone. It's about you to make things working and the cooperation as I just explained. So this is what I can in a nutshell summarize.
Thank you very, very much, Marie Bernard, for sharing this very inspiring transformation process. I will give now the floor to Mathieu, and then afterwards we are open for questions on these 2 cases. Mathieu, can I give you the floor, please? Can you unmute yourself?
Here I am. Hello, everyone. I'm 51 years old. I have 1 wife only and 3 kids. I have been working in Decathlon for 12 years operationally, and then I became an entrepreneur. I started my own business, and I came back in Decathlon as a board member and then as a chairman of the board from 2012 to 2018. I got fired, let's put it this way. And let me walk you through some slides that I have, only images, but that will give you a better feeling of who I am and how I work and why I got fired. So let me share my screen now. Of course, you can ask questions at any time or at the end if you feel more comfortable. That will be the first slide when I was chairman of Decathlon. Maybe twice a week, I would do a cultural speech for about 2 hours, twice a week. And usually there will be 100 people or 200 people in the room. And that was my key, the central part of my job was to share the culture. But you can see the bottom sentence was, screw it, let's do it. And that was from Richard Branson's book, which I don't like the book, but I like the title. But somehow I think further down into the presentation, we can see that somehow because I screw it, of course we did it, but somehow I screw it with my shareholders and board members and so on. One of the key point whenever I would be doing a cultural presentation was the sentence, you must change to be better who you are as an individual and also as a company. And Decathlon was about 40 years old when I joined. And so it was midlife crisis for Decathlon. And my perspective was Decathlon had to change to be better who it was. And it was not an option, it was must change. And of course, after 40 years of operations, Decathlon was very much into a matrix organization, quite hierarchical. There was like 12 layers and many things I think had to change. For example, the CEO was managing 12 people in the management team, and every 2 years they will come with 12 strategical axes. So every 2 years they will change the strategy, and basically you would have one person in the management team in charge of one strategy. And that was very hard to remember, very hard to be focused. And those are the kind of things I changed in Decathlon, even though culture was very important. And for me, it was quite easy because when Decathlon was founded, I was 8 years old. And of course, Decathlon is a family-owned business. My father started it. And so it was very easy for me to focus on the culture, focus on the past, and at the same time, invent the future. And of course, I read those books that you just spoke about, Fred Laloux, Isaiah Getz, which I met many times. I met them after, in fact, not really during the process, but I read their books. And I really, when I appointed the new CEO, after being in my position for like a year, I decided to replace the CEO. The CEO was doing a good job when I was listening to my board members or my shareholders. Everybody was happy with him. He had been in that position for 12 years, yet there was a lot of people around him that were the same for many, many years. And I think it was lenient. I'm not so sure about the word, but I think it was too comfortable. And Decathlon was growing more or less 5% a year when our competitors, when Nike, Adidas, or the major brands into sports were growing at 10 to 15%. So Decathlon was doing quite well compared to the other family business that in my family, we own. But it was losing basically market share. One of the first things I realized when I became chairman is Decathlon only had 2% of the world market share in the mass market of sporting goods. And so that's where I said, okay, let's be focused because we only have 2%. And since we have only 2%, we have to grow to 20%. And that gives us basically 15 years of 15% growth a year for 15 years. So that was a very clear message, but yet it was done respecting the past and looking at the culture. And that was very easy for me because I was raised into Decathlon. So I could see what was making Decathlon not very much aligned. On the strategy, Decathlon was trying to make sports for all. And basically we change and we say, okay, let's do sports product for the many, not for all. And it was quite a nuance. And for the many means, let's focus on our market share of mass, let's help people start sports, or let's help people improve into sporting good, but let's not try to compete with the brand that are serving the athletes. And most sporting good company are in a differentiation mode, like Montblanc. They try to take as much margin as possible, and they hire high sports people, athletes, to do a lot of advertising. And Decathlon was more, to me, like the big. And so one of the big focus as a chairman I highlighted was, let's be proud of being a mass market company like BIC, and we have to focus on cost. Let's others focus on differentiation, but let's execute very well what we do on a daily basis. And that was basically the roots and the heart of Decathlon at the very beginning. But as the company grew and as the company got older, it was unclear. And I think one of the main thing I helped the new CEO establish was the focus on mass market. I went to HBS. I was lucky. I followed the OPM program, and it's like 9 weeks in 3 years. A beautiful program for chairman and owner of corporation. And when I came back from that, that's just before I finished the program, just before becoming the chairman. And so it was quite clear in my mind, and I came up with this spinal cord, backbone, I would say, with a different vertebrae. And you can see I try to split the roles. We've been speaking with Marie Bernard about roles, and I try to clarify my role as a chairman, being on the culture, which is the best practices, the thing we've been doing in the past for the last 40 years, and we are doing well, the value of the company and the purpose. And I try to let my CEO clarify what business model we are in, the low cost part of it, the 10 years vision, and highlight one strategic objective, not 21. And that was the CEO responsibility, in order to have a business unit leader with a lot of autonomy. And that's what we call a balanced scorecard. If you're familiar, it's quite basic. At the very bottom, you start with the happiness of the employees. And when the employees are satisfied, then they do the job well. The process are well executed. When the process are well executed, then you get the user are happy. And if the user or customer come back because they're happy, then you get profitability. So that was quite clear. And that was basically my focus when I was a chairman. Now that I got fired 2 years ago, I think somehow my position was not really the chairman. My position should have been to be the source of the company. Like before, we've been speaking about the torch, that someone has been transferring the torch. And I think as the chairman or the owner representative, somehow you have to have the torch. And I think the torch somehow need also to highlight the strategy, the next step. And so if I was chairman again in Decathlon or in another corporation, somehow I will keep the culture, but I will somehow involve myself more into the next step. What's the next step for the company? And so, but yet that was helping me clarifying the roles for the chairman, for the CEO, and for the business unit leader. And with that principle in mind, we tried to cut the hierarchy level. Because as I told you, when I joined, there were 12 hierarchy level, and somehow we were able to bring to 5 or 6 just by highlighting leaders. And so we will be able to discuss maybe further down, but let's speak a little bit about leadership, because in Decathlon history, we were managers. So we had, the CEO would tell that his position was to be a manager. And a manager in Decathlon managed about 10 people. And he has monthly meeting with each one of them. He clarifies the strategy, the KPI, the budgets, and also the pay. The manager will be in charge of the pay. And that led to many hierarchy level, because when I joined the company as a chairman, it was 60,000 employees, and now it's almost 90,000 or 100,000, but yet it was many hierarchy level. And so the new CEO and myself, when I appointed him, I gave him those books, Reinventing Organization, Isai Getz. he had read them before, but the one I gave him, when I appointed him, I gave him my own books with my subtitle, what I highlighted, and I told him, okay, before you take the position, please review those books and look at what I highlighted, what's important for me, and make sure we are aligned. And of course, both of us, we were very upset with the 12 hierarchy level and not very flexible organization. A lot of politics were going on. And so one day, maybe 1 year after having that in mind, 1 year after he was in the position, I remember clearly we discussed about the manager's issue, and the leadership part of it was coming to point out. And then I told him, okay, why don't we change, why don't we replace managers by leader or coach? Because as we just said, the manager was, he had a hierarchy level on his subordinates. And when we came with the idea of saying, okay, there is no more managers, either you are a leader, either you are a coach. And so suddenly we were able to, the CEO was, instead of managing 10 people, he was able to manage like 100 business unit leader. And he would meet them 2 or 3 times a year. He would gather the 100 top leader of Decathlon, and they have to find on their own way, they have to find on their side their own coach. So the CEO, and we were able to do that in 2 or 3 levels, like the leaders, the country leader or the sports leader, they were able to lead 100 people instead of 10. And so just by this move at the CEO level and at the leadership level, we were able to kill 3 or 4 hierarchy level. So, and I think somehow it's a key point right now in my perspective about corporation. It's about leadership and move away. We need leadership because we need inspiration, we need purpose, and we need agility and ability to adjust to this environment, which is changing so fast. And so for us, contrary to Mercuri Urval, from what I understood, we basically went through a decentralization. Decathlon was quite centralized when I arrived in 2012. And we basically decentralized because the new CEO, before being the CEO, he was head of India. And he was so annoyed with the headquarters taking decision for him in the aspect of real estate, finance, IT, and he was slowing him down. So when he became the CEO, the first action he took said, now the country leader, they don't report to the headquarters anymore. They are on their own. Of course, they can get advice from the headquarters, but they don't report directly to the headquarters. And the CEO was living in India and he decided to stay in India. And myself as the chairman, that's when I decided to relocate to UK. So basically the headquarters had no chairman and no CEO, and somehow the headquarters started to shrink, and the power was given to the country leader and to the sports category like Quechua, Tribor. Each brand had each sport had its own brand and was quite autonomous, and they were all reporting to the CEO. And so because there was less hierarchy level, it was much better communication going through the organization. I came after the backbone and the vertebrae. I also came with this kind of chart, which was highlighted with what were our best practice, what were our true values. When I took the responsibility, we had 4 values, but they had changed somehow throughout the years. And very few people could explain the value of Decathlon, and very few could say accurately what were the 4 values. So in that same book about Isaac Getz, when Zobrist testified, he said you need only 2 values, one the right brain, one the left brain. But by having only 2 values in a stressful situation, you can keep those values in mind, and you can act very easily with much less stress. Because when you are in a stressful situation, your mind is much less able to adjust. So that's why you want to simplify as much as possible. So we simplified from 4 values to 2 values, and we highlight and make the purpose more easy to understand. We make sports accessible for the many, which is which the sentence was much more complicated before. It was a very long sentence, and very few people could say the value, and very few people could say the purpose of the corporation. And so what I changed, because we always speak about purpose, sense, direction, vision. And so what that last sentence, sorry, maybe my screen, but the sentence at the bottom of the chart is that this makes sense for your action locally. So this was basically my saying to the team is you better understand the cultural frame, but once you understood it, then you better act locally according to yourself. You are a decathlonian. We only or mostly do internal promotion. We have very little hire from the outside. And so people know the culture, they know the job. And so I basically empowered them, and I was able to highlight that culture of empowerment, which was basically at the very beginning of Decathlon, because Decathlon was a very successful company because it was very it was very decentralized at the very beginning, very little hierarchy, good trust, a lot of data information, the P&L, everybody had all the information about the profit and loss and so on. But because we had a lot of CFO and a lot of controllers, when the company got almost 40 years old, somehow I think the back office and the headquarters had the control, not the leaders and not the country manager or the brand manager. So that's an illustration of what's happened. This is basically the value creation in Decathlon, and basically we created more value in those years when I was chairman than the whole history of Decathlon. Yet I got fired, so that's not enough. And I think if I try to give the root causes of being fired, is this slide that I got from HBS when we basically came with the I took my brothers and sisters to a 1 week training on the we went for a 1 week training on the family in business with John Davis, and it's about having a united contributing family at the bottom that basically can select loyal and capable owners. So yet we can see that a family is different from owners, and then you get the owners would select a governance and capable and aligned, not only family members, but per competences and capability. And then those will trust and entrust a leadership. And somehow what happened to me is that my family base was very, very, doing very bad. And I might have to leave you for like 2 minutes because my daughter got injury and was to the hospital, and now she's coming back home. Okay, so it's okay. So I can stay with you. But there might be some noise, and I apologize for that. So once I try to get my mind clear here, what happened to me, and I tried to explain it to Abby and Beatrice last time when we spoke over the phone, is lack of trust, because the very first stone, the one at the very beginning, never happened. We never had a united contributing family. And so when my father was the chairman and the founder, he was by himself, and it was quite easy for him to be a kind of a good dictator. But when basically first in 2010, he transferred the torch to my older brother, which really didn't like the job, and I don't think he was good for that job, but he didn't like it. So just after 2 years of being the chairman, he resigned, and I basically took the control without permission. I was not selected by my father, I was not selected by my brother, I was not selected by my cousins, but basically I took control because I was fresh, graduated out of HBS. I loved Decathlon, of course. I worked 12 years in Decathlon before. I was an entrepreneur, quite successful in my own retail stores. And so I basically took the control. But if I may try to illustrate that, because we spoke about the torch. So I'm not so sure if you can see me now, but if can you put the picture maybe? I don't know why it's ecoDa and you don't see me. Okay. Ah, yes, you can see me. But basically what I'm saying, it's like the torch is like a relay when we do running. And basically I took it from my brother and my father, but I thought I had it. And I thought I could be the leader, and I thought I could transform Decathlon and put more freedoms and more trust into the organization. But in fact, what I realize now, 2 years after, and I just got it clear in my mind about a year ago, is that my father was still the source. He was still the founder, and he wanted to remain as the founder. He wanted to remain as the founder, means the one that will discuss and the one that will lead to the next step. And so it was a misalignment between myself and my fathers and my brothers and my cousins. And even though the results were very good, for 4 years in a row, we grew like 15% a year, organic growth. Yet the last year, for 6 months in 2018, from the first 6 months of 2016, we basically had a decrease in sales from some internal organization, bad timing, bad adjustment. Then suddenly sales went down. Everybody got scared about the freedom. My father was saying, why do you need freedom? You've always been in a freedom company. And so he was very upset with the freedom books that were going around, even though we never spoke about freedom. But he was scared about the future. He was scared. So my brothers and my cousin got scared. And the first 6 months of 2018 were bad for retail in general, but even bad for Decathlon. And then I screw it, because they asked me to change my board. They wanted to review my board members. And I said, no, it's my board. I appointed those people. They will go to the end of their mandate. Give me 1 year, give me 2 years, but let's do it step by step. And eventually they say, if you don't change your board, we will change you. And I say, screw it, you will never do that. You will never do that. And they did it. And so we had lunch on a Wednesday. I remember it was lunchtime, and I had my 2 shareholder representatives having lunch with me, and that's where they put some pressure. And I said, screw you. And then at 7 p.m. they call a board meeting with all the shareholders. And next day in the morning at 9 o'clock, I heard that I was gone. So it's been 2 years now. So it's, as I said, I cannot really testify about what's the right organization. I know the one I tried. I don't even know now if it's really in place in Decathlon, because I decided to leave my own path. And see, I want to transfer to my kids their ability to give the best of themselves and to reveal their talent. And so I thought this family organization was not working. And so I decided not to do a family holding company. So I want to be an entrepreneur. I'm starting companies, I'm managing companies. And somehow in the future, I will have to transfer to my kid or to the employees or to someone else. But I'm not going to transfer a family holding with my kid having to take a decision together. I think it's better that they live their own life. If they want to be an artist or a businessman, we will see. And depending on their capability, depending on what their motivation, then maybe I will transfer to them either some cash or nothing, or maybe a corporation, and that we will see. I'm not so sure, Abby, about the timing, so maybe it's time for me to stop now.
It's perfect, Mathieu. Perfect. Thank you very much, Mathieu, for this for your openness and your authentic testimonial of the transformation of Decathlon. So I turn now to our participants. Are there any questions either to Marie or Mathieu on the cases that they presented?
Well, it's Martin Studer. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so thank you, Marie-Bernard and Mathieu. Very fascinating stories, both indeed. And I've got a question which deals with time. And as Marie-Bernard outlined the Mercury Urval story, I found this chart with the building blocks starting somewhere in 2016, leading into 2020, very nicely structured. And it tells a story of time, how a transformation needs time on the one hand, but also needs structure and foresight. So I don't really know whether this foresight, whether this chart already looked the same in 2016 or was retrofitted, but that's not the point. What I'm really keen to get some more perspective from both Marie-Bernard and Mathieu is about time. So Mercury Urval chose a journey of 4 or 5 years. Mathieu, you did it for 2 years and then your shareholders pulled the plug. What if you would have had a story of 5 years negotiated with them? Would that be a different setting for another kind of venture? So I'm keen to learn from both how you consider this kind of variable of time, of essence for such corporate transformation.
If I may, Marie, there is a very nice book about Yvon Chouinard, who is the leader and the owner and founder of Patagonia. And he says 4 years are needed to simplify and make a pure product. Something that has no extra and everything. And basically, when I took my position, it was from 2012 to 2018. So it was a 6 years period. But so I was able to discuss that with the company. It was very easy. I had my own board, Decathlon board, and that was very easy. Where I struggled was with the family board, the real owners, not the holding owners, not the company board and company CEO and staff. That was very easy. But I think obviously, I went too fast, and not that I went too fast because I think it was the right path for the corporation, but I never took attention. I never pay attention to my shareholders. And when I will tell them, screw you, that was really what I would tell them, if they were scared or if they will slow me down, I would say, screw you, I will do it my own way. And that's how I didn't get them involved. So of course, time, and I think what Yvon Chouinard, he speaks about 4 years, and I think that will be the minimum for me to restructure or change or reinforce an organization. But my failure was to involve my shareholders and the family shareholders in that path. Maybe should I give them the book? Maybe should I have make some discussion with them to reassure them? But they were, in my mind, there were too many things that was at the psychology of the family that was not well established, and that you could do many things. It would be almost impossible because everybody was fighting on his own. But timing is key, and in involvement, I would say, in involvement ahead. That will be the second advice.
Marie, would you like to add something? You're on mute.
I will take this off because. Can you hear me? Okay. So yes, what I would add is that when you need to transform something, you need a sense of emergency. And we could have seen that with the COVID. So many companies have changed drastically. It's because we were in a crisis, and that's a very good booster, I would say, to start the transformation. Now, regarding Mercury Urval, we've been sometimes too fast, sometimes too slow. I think we've been too slow in moving from a service to another one. We could have been moving faster to the executive search services, for instance. But regarding the way we've done it, it's not a question of timing, but it's also a question, as Mathieu is saying, it's to be more inclusive. So we got this transformation, which was more a top-down decision. And what the chairman of the board and the CEO recognized today is that it took much more time afterwards to convince the people. They could have won some time by being more inclusive, like making some workshop with the consultants so that they could start to, brainstorm them about the new way of being, the new organization. And like that, they would have been much more faster in the train. So we took quite lots of time, I would say, afterwards to make sure all the wagons are there with the locomotive. So being more inclusive, and it's a bit what Mathieu is saying, it's about the same, being inclusive with the family also in this mindset. So with the people, but with the board. So it's a real inclusive thing, probably I would say.
Thank you. Involvement, inclusiveness. Michel, you have raised your hand. You would like to ask a question?
Yes, please. I can't, you need to release my video. Okay, I think it's working. Yeah, okay. Good afternoon. So, as chairing the policy committee of ecoDa, I'm interested by governance principles. hearing what has been said, it seems, if I may be a bit blunt, it seems that the chairman were executive chairman, and they had the CEO, and it seems that it was a sort of one-to-one relationship. And several times we heard my board, for instance, and therefore it was a one-to-one chairman to CEO, and I would say almost executive chairman to CEO. And not, so what about the board versus the executive committee, which is a team-to-team approach? So do you think that the chairman is only chairing a board and the CEO is leading an exco, an executive committee? So the governance issue is about what role do you give to board members on the one hand, specific roles or permanent roles, committees, etc. And what role do you give to executive committee, which I think you call business unit leaders? But I think we are coming from a time where it was leaders one-to-one, and now it's leaders team-to-team.
Mathieu?
Yes, yeah, it's a good governance point. I mean, obviously, we had a one-to-one relationship between the chairman and the CEO, and it almost never happened for me in 6 years to be part of the executive committee. So the only one time I was invited is because I replaced the CEO. So I invited myself to tell them that their CEO has been replaced. But you're right, it's a one-to-one relationship. We would meet on a monthly basis, like half a day plus lunch. So it was quite an intense relationship between the chairman and the CEO. And it's true that in my family, we mix two kinds of board. There is the real board and there is the strategic committee. So when I was speaking about my board, in fact, I was speaking about the strategic committee, which we would meet 4 or 5 times a year for 2 days. And one day we'll be visiting stores and the corporation. And one day would be the CEO and some of his executive team will present some strategies. But the strategic committee was not really taking decision except validating the budget. We would say once a year, reviewing the budget, but it was just a review and validating maybe a key orientation, strategical orientation that would have been discussed between myself and the CEO. So I understand clearly that we are not we are not organized, or our governance was not, to your point, involving board members or the chairman and board members as independent, because it was an executive chairman. You're right, and I think in my feeling now that I'm out is the role of the one who carried the torch, and who is the one carrying the torch in a family-owned business, and I think is somehow the chairman. I think that's his role. I think his role is to be the founder of the future in the very long term. And I think somehow my feeling, it's not governance. It's more like dictatorship. It's somehow who is the leader carrying the very long-term vision in family-owned business. And I think somehow I think it was me, or it should have been me, or it should be someone else, but it should be someone, not an organization. And I don't think it can be an employee. My feeling, and I think that somehow that's further away from corporate governance principle that you highlight, which I read about it and I understand, but I don't think it will apply to a family-owned business incarné. I'm not so sure how you say that in English. When it's incarné, incarnation, no? I'm not so sure about it. But my feeling is Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, they are very hard to manage. But Apple without Steve Jobs was not going well. So how can maybe I should stop here because I'm pretty sure I'm not so clear. But we were not applying corporate governance because we are a family-owned business and we were not a public or listed corporation. And it was more a strategic committee, and I was the one to appoint the members of the strategic committee, and it was only 5 people, including me. So, and that was the maximum. So basically it was only 4 people, and they were all family members, and they were entrepreneurs, and then they were not really representing the capital. They were more like helping me and helping the CEO reflect on his strategic orientations.
Thank you, Mathieu. Ludgard, you also raised your hand.
Yes, please. First of all, I would like to congratulate Abby and Beatrice for bringing us such interesting cases and good speakers. Very nice to listen to both of you. However, I have a couple of questions. First of all, I think that what Mathieu is bringing is far beyond the theme of today. It's a great story, and I think it would be interesting to look into that case study for many other governance issues. As Michel correctly pointed out, family governance is so key to make those businesses sustainable in the long term, let alone to transform them into non-hierarchical organizations. I hope that in the discussion later on, we'll have the time to come back to that. But my main question to both speakers is that when I look into the details of their transformation, I see an opposite direction. And I would like to know if my understanding is correct and if it has something to do with how you build non-hierarchical organizations. If I look at the Mercury Urval case study, I see that they have gone from what was called national kingdoms to an integrated approach with teams internationally, collaborating with the CEO, coaching the business area leaders, coaching the team leaders, and so on, from a global international perspective. When I look at the case study of Decathlon, I see that their transformation went the other way around. They started to decentralize, give country leaders more autonomy, and diminish the role and the structure of the headquarters. So what direction should you go if you want to have a non-hierarchical organization? Thank you.
Thank you, Ludgard. Perhaps Marie, would you like to clarify?
Right.
Or
maybe I express it.
Oppose
Yeah.
Ludgard's observation?
No, it's very interesting. First, we don't have the size of the group of Decathlon, so I don't know if the size can make a difference too, because we are about today, we are coming from 600 people to 400 people. So of course it's not this, we don't play in the same yard, I would say, as Decathlon. So that could be one of the reasons. We should not forget though that even if in Mercury Urval there is these guidelines and these objectives and those KPI and this will to be international, every single team has the autonomy to do also what she wants to do, what the team wants to do. So we could decide about our local strategy. We could decide if we want to go more on international or not, because we know our market and we know what's the best according to the market we have and the people we have. Because at the end of the day, it's about being profitable. So the centralization is more for the method, the process, the mission, the value, the KPI in terms of, okay, you are so many consultants, how many square meters are you allowed to have per office, for instance, or how many assistants. So it's quite clear about how to be profitable, I would say. This is where the guidelines are. Now, when it comes to business, we have also some clear KPI that help us to be successful. We know, for instance, that as more contacts and networks we have and potential buyer we have, more chance we have to be a successful consultant. But doesn't mean you need to have 100 potential buyers to be successful. We have some consultants who are very successful with 50. So it's not mandatory. You do whatever you want, but we know that statistically you will be successful if. So that's more about putting data at the service of what you want to do and how you can make yourself and your team successful and your company successful. There is no thing such as mandatory. It's volunteer. You want to be more international, be international. You want to stay local, stay local. You want to work with non-profit, work with non-profit. It's your choice, but do it well. So that, don't know if it answered the question. So, but that's, the freedom is there to answer properly to the local need of the client.
Thank you, Marie. Mathieu, would you like to add something to the observation of Lutgard?
Lutgard was right. I mean, we decentralized strongly, but the company was born decentralized. So I think for me, it was very easy. And one of my strong conviction, because I love to speak about culture and at different places, and I've been speaking about culture like twice a week for maybe 2 or 3 years, I came to a conviction that you cannot change a culture. It's impossible to change a corporation or an organization culture. The best you can do is reinforce the culture. And that's what basically was very easy for me, because I was there at the beginning. I was a kid, then I was an adolescent, I was doing practices, then I joined, my first job was in Decathlon. So I was there at the very beginning. So I just had to reinforce the part of the culture that will be useful now, and not focus on the part of the culture which was not good enough for the 21st century. So just as a leader, as a embodied leader, if I can take the right word now, incarné, un leader incarné, I just have to take the torch, and with the torch I can highlight the part of the culture which I think was useful for the 21st century. And that's to me, I find that so easy. You know, in 6 years as a chairman of Decathlon, I don't think I ever slept well. I ever slept bad at night. I never had, I think, not one operational concern about Decathlon doing right, doing wrong. No, it was, managing Decathlon was very, very easy. What was keeping me wake up at night was the email I received from my father, the phone call from my brothers, my cousins, board members, abstract or compte rendu, when they would send me notes from their meeting with some quote or some questions, some insight which were absolutely not adapted or adjust to what was happening in Decathlon. So yeah, I think reinforce your culture. So if your culture is centralized, you could remain centralized. I don't think, my point of view is there is more freedom in a decentralized, but that's because that's the way I know the business. But maybe if you are Apple or if you are Tesla, maybe you need to be very centralized. So I don't think I'm pretty sure you can trust people and you can empower them my guess would be you can empower people in any kind of organization as long as it's yours and as long as it fits well with your culture. But if you try to change the culture, you might just lead to a fiasco, and because you cannot change the culture. That's what I think at this point.
Common mission, vision, and a really strong culture as key ingredients. Roger, you are eager to ask your question as well.
Yes, indeed. And thank you to both of the speakers. I really enjoyed both of your accounts. Very interesting indeed. I have a question for both of you. My question for Marie is, you've really described how your organization professionalized itself. And I suppose my question for you is really that what was happening, that you were professionalizing, you were creating better information flows, you were managing on the basis of KPIs, you were really updating and modernizing your business. Wasn't it that was really happening rather than actually any true decentralization? It was about professionalization. That was my question for you. And then for Mathieu, it sounded, the way you described it, Mathieu, it sounded as if you were a really inspirational and energetic business leader. Did you ever consider actually taking the role of CEO? Rather than chair, because it seemed to me you were incredibly interested and engaged in how the business was running itself almost on a day-to-day basis. And I suppose the other observation I have is that because there wasn't, I suppose, a conventional governance structure, because it was ultimately still about the power of individuals that put you in a vulnerable position, didn't it? Because at one point the power was in the hand of your father. In the next moment it was in your hands. And of course, you're always vulnerable, aren't you, to having the power taken away. So did you ever wish perhaps you would kind of legitimize your position at some point by putting in place you know, what would be regarded as an independent board of directors?
Marie, would you like
Yeah.
firstly to answer the question?
Yeah. Thank you. I try to answer the best as I can and from my knowledge. And yes, I understand. And there has been lots of professionalization, but I would say we had no choice. If we wanted to survive, we had to go through that, because professionalizing the way we've been doing was a great way to help us to manage costs better. We've been changing also our rewarding system, which help us also when there is crisis to have lower cost. And whenever we are more successful, then the consultant can gain more. So we can manage that, because the cost is much lower than what it used to be. When you have very heavy costs that you cannot move very quickly, then in terms of crisis, it's very difficult to pass faster the crisis. So it was also about agility. Mastering the cost is a good way for you to be much more agile whenever it's requested. We had no choice neither regarding the product, because we knew the product would disappear on longer term. And if we wanted to be sustainable, we needed to be alert on product wise. And now with this new governance, with this new committee, as I've been explaining earlier, this committee helping the executive people to think ahead, we are able to anticipate more, I think, and therefore to see in advance where do we need to move to make sure we will still bring added value and therefore be profitable and all the things we can have with the company. And then being one Mercury Urval and having common way of thinking and acting, common tools, it's also a more agile way to include new consultants coming in, because it's quite standardized. So you win some time, but you win in quality and you win in alignment. So we are much more agile when somebody new is coming in. It's much faster for those people to understand and to have access to whatever is needed to be included in the teams. So, and we need to be fast. I mean, we'll get to know more and more crises. So we need to quickly react, and having less layer between the management, which is, there is no headquarter, by the way. It's like in Decathlon, we have our CEO is in UK, and then we have other people in Holland and everywhere. The chairman is in Sweden. So there is not such building as headquarter anymore. But having less layer, it means once the CEO decide and explain why we need to go that direction, then through the team leader and consultant, we are very fast in moving. You know, it's like all this bank of fish. Suddenly they can jump and move quickly from one side to another one. But if you have a big Titanic boat, it takes a long time before turning. So that's about that. It's about making every fish the ability to move very fast whenever we have an obstacle in front of us.
Thank you. Mathieu?
Yeah, I love Roger's point. First, I will start with the second one. Of course, I was in a very vulnerable position because I had not independent board members to legitimate what I was doing. So the strategic committee was, of course, the real strategic organ of Decathlon, but it was not legal. So of course it had no power. And so they would, once a year, we would report to the shareholders, but the shareholders had the power. And I met some chairmen that have been legitimated by independent board, and they are, every 4 years they have to be renewed, and that's maybe a stressful situation. Whereas in my position, it's like a 15 years old position when you're the chairman of a family-owned business. But that's to the first point, and I totally agree with you. That would have helped to make that process of legitimization more clear. After, the key point is CEO or chairman, and do I have a temper to be a CEO rather than being a chairman? I don't think so. I think it's executive chairman and CEO. And CEO in my mind means Chief Executive Officer. So it's about execution. So if you get to the point, maybe could be not a very nice word for a CEO to hear that in my mind, a CEO is the Chief Execution Officer. But he has to, if things goes down, I think he should be the one awake at night, not me. If I am in charge of the culture on the very long term, I should not be looking at the figures. And I promise you, I would look at the figure only when we have, like every 3 months, when we get the board, that's when I get the figures. But for 3 months, I was not looking at the numbers. And I would, if the number were going down, I would smile, because I would say, they have to fix something. And it was their issue, not mine. So my point is an executive chair or executive chairman, and that's where the role has to be very clear on what his role. And if it's the culture alignment, or if it's embody the culture, of course, I have to be on the ground, I have to meet the people, and I have to show the people that they work for family people. They work for a family, and they work for real people, not for just some shareholders far away. So one of the things we failed at, and now I got it more clear, and I tried to explain it, but maybe in my family, in the Mulliez family, which I part, there's like 600 shareholders, but there is maybe 20 that are founders. 15 to 20 people have started company. And when they start the corporation in retail, they become founder. And if you ask Gérard Mulliez, Patrick, Gonzague, Michel, if you ask my uncle, what's that title? They will tell you, I am the founder of Kiabi, Noroto, Laurent, whatever, you know, Auchan. But if you ask them now, when they are 87 years old, they will say, I'm the founder. So they never transfer the founder role. In a family-owned business has to carry the founder role, because corporation needs to be reborn, or to refound themselves every generation. That's for sure. And now maybe the world is accelerating, so it's not even 25 years, maybe it's every 10 years, every 15 years. But someone has to have that responsibility, and somehow that's where I would see a distinction between an executive chairman in his role, in his cultural role, and an executive CEO, by definition, execution of, that's my answer. I don't know, Roger, if you're satisfied with that. I would love to.
It was very clear, at least, Mathieu.
No, absolutely, Mathieu, thank you.
Ghislain, you also wanted to raise a question, and then Pera, come to you. Ghislain, can you unmute?
Yep.
Okay.
I think that's okay. Thank you both for your presentation, very interesting. As we represent the ESG part of the panel, I have one question regarding sustainability. Do you think that it represents the most appropriate opportunity to experiment a less hierarchical organization, as when we prepare this webinar, all of us discussed about the challenges and issues for board members and supervisory board to deal with sustainability for listed and non-listed company. So do you consider that it would be a great experimentation for less hierarchical organization?
Was your question oriented to someone specific of the speakers, Ghislain? Or both of them?
I know that Decathlon is well advanced in sustainability by the products and also by financing solutions, but I'm curious to hear Marie-Guillaume and Mathieu to hear about their personal perception about the role of supervisory board in sustainability and in the long-term vision of the company.
Marie?
So when you talk about sustainability, we talk about the sustainability of the company, or you take it on a more global social way? Just to make sure I reply properly to what
more
you mean.
on the corporate side, so at the level of the company.
Well,
on the strategic aspect.
And then you ask what's the role of the supervision committee in that sustainability issue?
Not necessarily the role, but my point of view is it represents a great opportunity to involve many operational managers, external experts, and maybe to reshuffle the organizational supervisory board as sustainability concerned strategy, finance, human resources, etc., etc. So, of course, at the top of the top, the supervisory board is able to have the right decision about sustainability at the corporate level. But I'm curious to hear you about how this subject is important in the daily role of the board member, and if they have skills or vision standalone to make around sustainability, or if they need a less hierarchical organization and involve operational manager, external experts, etc.
Okay, I hope I will reply properly to your question if I understand it well. The sustainability in Mercuri Urval is guaranteed by the foundation. That's the role of the foundation, to make sure that the group is sustainable on longer term. And it's up to the board to present a strategy that is sustainable. So the foundation will be there as the guardian of that sustainability. And the board will build a strategy with the CEO and with the help of those development committee I've been telling you about. So this is where it will come. And we don't have really external being part of it. We used to have 2 independent external board members before the crisis. And then due to the COVID, those people resigned because they had quite lots of business to do inside their own organization. So they couldn't spend time anymore. The board is also pretty new for Mercuri Urval in the sense that the CEO has been nominated beginning of March. So before there were not such a formal role as CEO, and therefore Roger, who was playing the role of CEO, has become chairman. So I would say this type of governance just started now during the COVID, which is a quite exceptional case, at least for the moment. And therefore, I don't know later on how this will work regarding that, but I do believe that with those development committee we talk about and the board, such it is placed now with the CEO, with the chairman of the board, and there is also one partner which represent the shareholders, the partner shareholders, who is sitting also in this board. And those people are quite very active in business, so they know quite well about how to do things to go ahead in terms of strategy. So that's the way it is split today between all this organ of decision.
Mathieu, would you like to add something on the issue of sustainability and ESG? Excuse me.
Yeah, I'm not so sure about ESG. And when I hear sustainability, I need to, there are 2 dimensions for me. The sustainability of the corporation, that's my role as a chairman, is 10 years, 20 years down the road, and sustainability of the planet. So I always thought that the sustainability of the planet is not our responsibility at the board member, but it was how do we empower and make sure there is some accountability and some implication at the lower level. We call it subsidiarity. How do actions need to be local? If they are ecological or social action, they have to be local, not at the board level. So that was one part of my answer. And when we speak about sustainability or empowerment, I think in the past of Decathlon, before in the organization, it was about delegation, delegation of responsibility. And someone put it very right. When there is delegation, that means I give you the power, I give you the responsibility, but I can always take it back. So it was kind of a confusion. Who's really responsible? The one that gives the authority, but has the power to take it back. And that leads to a lot of politics. And that leads a lot of conviction. I need to convince people that what I'm doing is right. Whereas we think now, when there is some trust, I give you my trust, and there is no way I can take it back. Because I'm not giving you a delegation, I'm giving you my trust. And I think as far as sustainability and as far as empowering people, it's a very, very different message. Do you use CFO to put a delegation process in places, or do you put leader that will give employees their trust and will accept the failure? Because failure is part of the success, we know that. But somehow, that's what happened to me in 2018 at the beginning of the year. When sales went down, I was smiling because the CEO and myself, we knew that France made some mistake And those mistakes had some impact on Spain and Italy. And we could see the figure going down. They overreacted locally, and the French leadership did some stupid things. But that's it, you know. At the size of Decathlon with 50 countries operating, no big deal. I mean, we would lose maybe a little bit of money. Well, as a corporation, we were very, very profitable. But France was going to lose a little bit, and I was just eager to wait and see how they are going to fix their own mess. Not ourselves at the board meeting trying to fix it. So I think I just wanted to highlight the difference between delegation and trust, and somehow, sometimes corporate governance or organization highlight a lot the idea of delegation. But what I hate in delegation is the possibility to take the control again. And that's, to me, that's not highlighting enough the responsibility of the people. Once again, I'm not very sure if my answer is clear, but it is. That's it.
Mm-hmm. We also say, Mathieu, trust is good, but trust and verify is even better.
Trust and verify.
Yep.
Yeah, but we have the same saying in France, la confiance n'exclut pas le contrôle. We say it like that in French, but when I looked on the internet, it's Lenin or Stalin's. Put it like this, you know. So I'm not so sure if it's, of course, la confiance n'exclut pas le contrôle. No, trust doesn't exclude control, but I think it doesn't work. When you don't give me full empowerment, then I cannot embody the responsibility. And I'm just waiting you to take the control back rather than trying to fix it by myself. Because, and it's philosophical, but I have not put enough thinking and writing into that. It's just an intuition that I think trust excludes control, in fact. Mm-hmm. My wife disagrees.
Fair enough. Per, you put on your video, so I suppose you also would like to raise a question to our both speakers. You're still on mute. Can you unmute? Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay.
Perfect.
Well, thank you, Abigail. I guess my question is primarily directed to Marie. And just to say a few words about myself, for those of you who don't know me, I'm representing the Swedish member organization of ecoDa, where I'm chairing our international committee, and I'm also a policy member of ecoDa. And as a Swede, I certainly know Mercuri Urval quite well. And I even have a very close friend who worked in Mercuri Urval for quite many years. She doesn't work there anymore, but he did so until I think around 2005 or something like that. So, and it's a company that is quite well known in Sweden, although it's not a big listed company, but it's known for its bold governance model to a great extent. So my question is really, I mean, the company went through a rather fundamental change, I think, around the turn of the century, if I understand it right, around 20 years ago. From this very decentralized organization of 27 kingdoms, as you said, to a much more integrated and as Roger pointed out, more professionally run company, I think, but still with a very hierarchical organization, which is very unusual, actually. So my question is really, to what extent do you think that the norms and values and the practices and so on, and the culture of the previous phase of the company was a prerequisite for being able to change in this direction? Mm-hmm. And as a corollary, do you think that any company, any hierarchical, more traditional company, could go into the model that you have today without having this history back? I don't know if the question is clear, but you see what I mean?
Yes, I see what you mean. Just to specify it, it's from the year 2000 that the owner realized already that if we don't change something, we will have big issue. And we started really the transformation, I would say, when he left the company, and then we started to put in place all these blocks I've shown you.
Okay.
The question you raise is somehow also about, it's not about a model, it's about a journey. And it's true that we had some stepstone or some fundamentals that are still there. And that's what I meant by saying this entrepreneurial, those values such as freedom, autonomy, develop yourself, be a trusted advisor in front of the client. This is something I've always known in Mercuri Urval, and I entered personally in the year 2000. And it's built on those things that the transformation could happen. Now, when I've been before this afternoon, I had a very interesting conversation and interview with the chairman of our board and with our CEO, and asking all these questions. And what he said about those, and he said it's about somewhere, the way I translate it, it's about wisdom. It's about seeing clearly, where do you stand today? And do you need to do the transformation or not? Maybe your organization doesn't need. I mean, not everybody needs to be in this type of self-governed enterprises. Some companies can perform very well staying in the previous hierarchical model. So it's really about the board to have the wisdom to see clearly what's in front, what are the risks, what do we have, and how do we start the journey? And from where do we start the journey? And see, what do you have already on board? What do you have on your table? What do you need to change? What's the speed you need to put in place to make sure you do the right change at the right time? And then to start the journey with an inclusive way of doing it. Involve, and I would take what Mathieu said, if you are in a family business, like it was a case of Mathieu, and you have another shareholder, make sure the shareholders are on board and the people also in the organization are on board with your ideas. And what say also the chairman of the board is say that the role of the board and in such transformation is to make sure that it's fast enough, because the CEO and the executive people can be stuck in operational management and they may not have the speed to do it right. So that's also the role of the board, to make sure that the speed is properly done. But it's always the question of the right measurement. There is not black and white. It's about, okay, how do we navigate here? And how agile are we in case we find something on the way? And if we need to change something, change it. But
you know, the kind of culture you describe, with individual consultants being extremely independent and you know, self-governing, that's a part of this company since 50 years back or more. It was really, since I know a person who worked with it, it was remarkable, you know, that she was really an independent entrepreneur within the framework of this company.
Yeah.
And I just wonder, would it be possible to run the company in the present shape without having this culture of very independent and self-going, so to say, consultants?
And that's where we come to, it's all about people.
Yeah,
so
right.
That means that if you want to go into that transformation, you first, as a board, have to make sure that you've got the right executive committee in front of you. For instance, in a hospital here in Belgium, and due to the crisis and COVID crisis and other crises that might come in the future, the board was really worried about the executive team, and they thought that the team we have around the table is not able to face any crisis. So could you, Mercury Urval, assess those people and make sure that we board, we do have the right CEO and the right people who will be able to navigate in those future crises?
Okay.
So it's all about that. And if you realize, and that's what the CEO told me actually when I interviewed him, he said, the board should every morning ask himself the question, do I have the right CEO to lead the transformation? And every morning he should ask the question, not thinking he's right and I'm not coming back on it. Okay. And I like what Mathieu said about delegating and trusting. And there again, I don't think there is not one answer fit all. Again, it's about having the wisdom to see what is properly good to do for your organization.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for a very interesting.
Thank you. Thank you too.
Thank you very much. We still have a few minutes for a last question to our speakers with respect to their presentation on their own cases. If everyone is satisfied with the discussion and the debate on the cases, we can now turn to the open dialogue and reflection. Marie and Mathieu, thank you very much for your inspiring testimonials. And please, you're free to stay for the rest of this open dialogue. I see that you have turned on your video, Mr. Yeah, it's a code. Anthony?
Sorry, don't worry. I'm very happy for the speakers to sum up. Maybe in the summing up, I was just a question to excellent presentations and very authentic and really value them. And maybe as the speakers sum up, just a question of if we're all a product of all our experiences. So, but if they were to sort of tell themselves 5 years ago what they could have done better themselves in their role or differently, what would the one thing be that they think could have made a real change if they'd done it differently, accepting we are all who we are by virtue of all our experiences?
Very intriguing question. Thank you, Anthony. Marie?
It's a question about what I would have done personally differently.
Yeah, to have made you a better partner if you'd done something
as a partner. Well, I was not partner at that time. There was no partner. I was among the first partner, and it was in 2018 that we have been appointed as partner.
Yeah.
So 5 years ago, it was completely different. From my point of view now, what I may say, because I was not in the whole think tank reflection at that time. Of course, we sometimes heard something, but I can recognize what our CEO said by saying we should have been more inclusive. From this side of the board, of the table, I did not realize all the transformation which was on process. I did not realize all the move we were doing from a service to another one. And I do agree with what he said. If he would have been much more inclusive, I would have understood much faster and earlier where we were going, and I would have probably acted more faster on those way of being, on those type of being. So yeah, that I can recognize.
No, thanks, Marie.
Mathieu?
Yeah, it's quite easy for me because now I had 2 years to reflect on that. And that was quite obsessional for me because being fired from your own corporation when you are the shareholder and you've been raised into it and it's family linked. So it was it's a very tough time. And so, yeah, I got the answer a year ago, basically, watching and reading about the source person from Peter Koenig. And if you have a chance, check on Google. And there are some short videos about the in French, the person source. I don't know how they translate that, but I would say the source person. And I think I would have had more argument with my siblings about my role. Because when they appointed me, well, I took the control, but once I was in my position, after 3 months, they sent me a small message, which I received by email, and says, Mathieu is not the chairman of Decathlon. He is the chairman of the board. Part-time, primus inter pares. And so their mind was, don't think you are like your father. You are just there to manage the board. You are not your father. You are not here to be the CEO. You're not here to run the business. And so I believed them. And I basically appointed the CEO and I managed the CEO. And I tried to not to be very visible inside the organization. And that was wrong. Now I was in that position. You need to be the person source. You need to be the one highlighting the culture and defining the next strategical step. And that comes from almost from intuition. It's not, of course, you can debate and discuss with the board members and board meeting and strategic committee, whatever. But at some point, you know what's good for the corporation. And that's an operational role. It's not a non-executive. It's an executive role in the chairman position. So now, for me, I would have gained clarification on my role. And if they wanted I'm a founder. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a founder, and that's who I am. And basically, they were neglecting or they were refusing me to be a founder of Decathlon. And one of the first things I did for fun when I received that email telling me that I was not the chairman of Decathlon, I was just a chairman of the board. When I received that, I changed my signature, my email signature, and I say, Mathieu Leclerc, Decathlon's founders, like any chairman. And it was in 2012, and I put it only for a few months just for fun. But in my mind, it was clear that I was in that position to enable Decathlon to refresh itself or to rebound after 40 years. But that was my shareholder didn't see that like that, because their mindset was non-executive chairman, only 1 day a week. And I was paid 120,000 euro for being the chairman of a corporation of 67 people. Yeah. And of course, my father, when he was the CEO and chairman, he was making 1 million. And the corporation was 4 times smaller. And so basically, when I was appointed almost 10% of what my father was making. Yeah. And of course, I should have not accepted that. And I got the salary 6 months after I was in job. So of course, I had the job description and I had the salary 6 months into my position. So of course, we never had time to discuss that beforehand. Yeah. And gain clarity, I think, it's a must in any kind of governance. Yeah. And is it delegation? Is it trust? Is it autonomy? Is it responsibility? I don't know, but I think gain clarification so that there is more alignment and more. But it's a long answer, so once again.
No, thank you.
Thank you, Mathieu. And the role clarification brings me needless to my first question that I would like to put into the open dialogue. And I would like to put a question to Ludgard to start the discussion. And corporate governance, and inherently we're talking about direction and control, and the two main key roles of the board. Ludgard, what in your opinion should be the role of the board, of what can be the role of the board be in a less hierarchical organization compared to the traditional command and control organized companies?
Thank you, Abby, for this triggering question. I have maybe more questions than answers to give to you, but let me try to use some of the lessons learned also today. Mathieu was referring to invent the future and honor the past as a kind of a red line for the Decathlon story. I think we need the same. We need to look at why is there a board? What should a board do? And then try to look at how can we reinvent the future for boards. Looking back, and you've also used that sentence in the introduction, governance, in my opinion, is about doing the right things and doing things right. Goes back to the famous Cadbury and the many IODs that later on used that sentence as their main framework, in fact, for governance developments. So this means it's what is right. It's about decision-making on what is right. So it is also linked to the whole discussion of the purpose of the company, but it's also linked to who has the power to make decisions. And in a traditional company, and we've heard the Decathlon family business story, it's often the shareholder that finally decides. But nowadays, we are looking much more beyond that and looking into stakeholder interests. So there's the first difference, I think, whether you have a non-hierarchical or a hierarchical approach, boards will need to look much more into the interests of components of the stakeholders other than the shareholders. So the relationship with the knowledge society and the knowledge workers will be tremendously important in the future, I think. But why has there been a board created in the very beginning? It's because the board needed to make the decisions on behalf of the owners, if we really go back to the first history of governance. So we should also look at the legal elements of control and demand. Who will be able to direct the company and who will be able to control the company? I think there will somehow, whether we trust everyone, as Mathieu was referring to, if you trust, you don't need control. I'm not so sure that you can govern a company by trusting blindly everyone. I think there needs to be some type of control. And although I think financial institutions would love to have less control, I do think we need control also in the future. But the question is, will it be the same type of control the board has? Will it be the same direction they can give? And therefore, I think that we should rethink the whole scale economies, why a board is there and why do we not have shareholders to decide. This will be much tougher if stakeholders' interests need to be involved. So if there is a need for a board because shareholders cannot govern the company, if we need to take stakeholder interest into consideration, we will need much more boards than ever before and board work than ever before. And I think there is also another element, it's the digital economy. So whether you have a flatter organization or a very hierarchical organization, I think the digital economy will influence the role of the board. At least it will influence its effectiveness. And where it's key, I think, is if you have a decentralized approach, you will have to have a much broader role for the board in consensus, in delegating and in trusting people, in looking whether they trust and whether trust can be honored, in the accountability. So you probably will have a much tougher role. And that's why I think independence is so key in order to make that consensus, to make that trade-off. And here again, I turn to the case of Decathlon that was referred to by Mathieu. If there had been more independence, it would probably have turned out differently. So summing up, I do think we do not have yet a real roadmap for a non-hierarchical organization's governance, but I do think we have the same ingredients of a board that should finally make decisions in the interest of a much broader stakeholder forum and a much broader purpose.
Thank you, Ludegard, for opening the discussion or the debate on the first question that was also on the role of the board and raised before by Michel. Anyone who want to reflect or put some additional comments to or answers to this question? Please, Michael, go ahead.
Martin, should I?
Martin, sorry.
Okay, I'm confused because I raised the hand, so I don't know whether we are still observing the raising the hand thing. Thank you, Ludegard, for your comments here. And finally, I find your reflection on shareholder versus stakeholder direction interesting as in my view, and I come in now as a representative of the ECIAA, maybe more from a lines of defense perspective. I would probably approach the topic more from a agent principle perspective, and I would then probably go and say shareholder stakeholder. Is it the board who is looking for the shareholders, or are the shareholders picking the board? And in my world, at least, it's the latter. It's the shareholders who select the board, and if the board make reasonable decisions on where to navigate with the company, then the stakeholders are obviously observed in the entire equation, because if not, then the stakeholders, the shareholders would be not satisfied, or the board would not run the company in a way the shareholders would support. So in my view, it's the shareholders who probably give the mandate to the board, also from a legal perspective. And it's an equation of the principal agent theory. Probably that doesn't go to privately owned companies like Decathlon. So there you've got more complications. But I wouldn't see it as a challenge of less hierarchical company at first instance. It's a governance question. Who owns the risk capital to fund a certain venture? And is the venture organized and directed to comply with the guidance of those who give the risk capital? But that's a perspective I just wanted to throw out also for maybe debate and reaction.
Abby, may I just
Yeah, sure.
Does that mean, in your opinion, that these shareholders are still the ones who dictate the future scope of the company, the purpose, and that from a less hierarchical perspective, the boards have to be the agents and still are the agents of the principal whom you define as the shareholder. Is that correct?
Well, I would say in the Western world, businesses are organized this way. So as a shareholder, you can choose whether you give or don't give your risk capital to an undertaking, and so to that extent, from a kind of a conceptual perspective, Ludgard, yes, I think that's how businesses are organized. But in my comments, I also consider obviously the wider stakeholder groups, but I would expect that if the board isn't navigating the undertaking to satisfy the wider stakeholder group, then this will adversely impact the shareholders' view on the board's ability to be the trustees of their kind of risk investment.
Thank you for the clarification, Martin. I saw also Paola jumping in.
That's true, but I wanted to contribute from another angle to the discussion, so I don't know if it's appropriate.
Yeah, sure.
So far. So as regards the role of the board in a flatter organization, I think that the board, as Ludgard clearly said, would work more in such a situation, and hence it should be as agile as the rest of the organizational structure. And I think that this goal could be achieved with a larger number of committees, of work committees being created, because I think that as I saw during the COVID crisis, the first months, the more critical months of the COVID crisis, hopefully, what we did in our boards was to meet as committee members on selected topics more often than before, of course, more often in the past. And we could share between committees the reflections we carried out, the activities we carried out. And that was much more easier than to have board meetings every week, every single week, which would have been really a burden for us. So I think that the agility of board work would also and should overall be enhanced through an endorsement, a further endorsement of the role of committees. But I don't know if it set up somehow to the discussion which was going on. Thank you.
Thank you, Paola. Do you see any danger in the frequent or increased committee workings in jeopardizing the consensus and collegial decision-making in the board?
Not at all, because the committee, as we know, have no delegated powers. So they have no power at all. They just have the role of getting deeper into the individual topics, of having a closer relationship with the management, and of then bringing the outputs of the work back to the board in a much more efficient way. So sparing the board, I mean, yes, sparing all the pre-work to the board. And if the board trusts the committee members, I think that this flows pretty well. So I would really recommend larger use of committees beyond the ones which are suggested by the corporate governance codes in the different countries.
Interesting, and I guess Ludgard also wants to react. I think we are on the same line of thinking, Ludgard.
Very interesting development that you suggest, and where I see a link with the less hierarchical organizations, is that in such a way you can bring the operation closer to the board, because for those meetings you will certainly involve much more people on a lower level to prepare those meetings, to nourish those dossiers, and that will bring the board closer to the teams But there is one element I think you should reflect upon. The board should remain non-executive.
Sure, that's the pre-requirement, let's say.
Maybe Daniela, I turn my question now to Daniela to jump into this discussion, because there is a lot to learn or to unlearn from the startup community, where boards or board members are per definition of far closer to the operational setting. Can you share some experience or give some lessons learned that you would like to share with us, and to see on the topics that is just being discussed by the committee, and the stepping in towards the operational level of board members, being closer to the operational level of board members?
Yeah, sure, Abigail, thanks. So when it comes to startups, I think there are some topics or some points we can learn and we can highlight. It starts from the question how boards go into the operations. That means they are much more closer because there are mainly the founder, or there are in the way trustee. We have less lines of defense mostly in startups, and that's it's good for very small companies, but when they are growing, we all discussing the questions, or when is the right point to implement these lines of defense, when we go and think on risk management, compliance, internal audit. What I picked up on the discussion before, and what is for me personally one of the critical points or the learning points from startups as a board member, is if we can still have the willingness as a board member and the brave to allow mistakes. So even if when we grow in a company and we as a board member, it's not in our DNA to allow mistakes in the decision making process, and also in the implementation of decisions. And we are much more familiar with rules and internal guidelines. And I see that we have often discussion on the question if the executive management follows internal rules, approval processes or not, then we really criticize and we are not agree with the material decision. And I would really, would like to discuss with you, so how you see how many freedom or how much freedom we can give to the operations, to the executive management, and how we have to change as a board member, as a non-executive board member, our mindset to really accept mistakes and failures in respect to maybe internal guidelines, internal rules. And I think maybe what you say, Paola, also in respect to COVID, it's maybe an example where we learned that sometimes it's not possible to follow internal rules just to make the decision quite fast and easy.
Well, if I may comment on this, because this morning I was reading an article about an Italian company producing components for Formula One cars, which appointed a failure manager whose task is to elaborate on failures in order to get a further experience and improvements out of them. So I think failures are welcome. Well, grave errors not, of course. Big mistakes are not allowed, but errors, I think, could be a very important source of improvements and of experience. And I think an open culture and an open communication, sound corporate culture and based on open communication channels should allow failures, and should, incentive, promote the communication of mistakes, by all employees and managers in order to collect them and to elaborate on them and building an experience out of them. So that's definitely my point of view.
I think your last point, Paola, is learning from your mistake is more important.
Exactly.
Not only making them, but especially learning from your mistakes. Anyone else who wants to reflect or add something to what the points been raised so far? Michelle, yes, please.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think in the debate and in the presentation, a lot of things have been tackled concerning the future. I don't want to be too historic in my description, but I think we have lived in what I call the wild capitalism, where the company did everything, including schools, churches. They had their own schools, their own churches. They were wild, they did what they want, and they did it successfully sometimes less. But then we came to the financial capitalism, which was about shareholders, profit, stock exchange, share price, shareholder return, etc. Now, I think what we see coming, and probably the family of the smaller enterprises are more realizing that because they live it permanently, all of them, is a sort of capitalism which should be trusted by anyone. Therefore, this capitalism must be responsible and controlled. And I think the word control has been mentioned several times. So now, let me be blank. In the past, we used to say, no shareholder, no company. Yes, it's still true, but no stakeholder interested in your company, no company. So you need shareholders and the relevant stakeholders, whether employees, no employee, no company, no supplier, no company, unless you are a phantom company, no customer, no company, no city to host your plants, your laboratories, your offices, no company. So this has been mentioned by Ludgard also and Paola. There is a sort of what we translate like saying corporations now should create value for shareholders and the relevant stakeholders in a sustainable way, which means for the longer term of the company and the long-term benefit of all those who are interested by the companies and its activities. So I think the role of boards now is much more parallel to the executive. The non-executives are becoming much more parallel to the executives, and they work together. So it's not one above the other or one controlling the other and doing a control job on it. No, it's a team of executives in the one hand, non-executives in the other hand. And they need to work together. And certainly, when you define the corporate purpose, the mission, the strategy of a company, this has to be done together. When I think you will have now to analyze the risk, not just the risk, but the impact of your activities. And this needs to be done together. And when I say together, it's the board, the executives, and also taking the advice, the views, the opinions through consultancies, through advisory committees, through direct inquiries, surveys, etc., of all those who are involved and concerned by your activity. Indeed, you need to identify the shareholders. Well, you see, it's a family business, it's rather easy. But if you are a listed company, it's sometimes more complex. And the relevant stakeholders. So in a family company, it's easy to identify the shareholders. But you also need to identify what are the relevant stakeholders for your company. and they are sometimes very specific. You also have a critical role, which is, and I've not heard the word mentioned, but you need to put in place and agree strategy plan, business plan, budget, which include targets and performance criteria, both financial and non-financial, and this is probably the trend. And these criteria ensure that what you aim for is aligned with the strategy, the short, medium, long-term plans, etc. And at least when you have performance criteria, when you have targets, you are able to control properly and to say, well, there is failure, there is success, or there is not enough success in this, on this criteria, too much on this one, and you can balance. So I think in the world we are now living, everybody, well, not everybody, I mean, not the entire world, but the relevant parties need to be consulted one way or another. You have the boards with shareholders, and don't forget, in Europe, in most countries, we have employees representation, which is one way or another is almost everywhere, almost. But as Paula mentioned, you will have stakeholders committees or stakeholders consultations or whatever. And I think the executives and the non-executives will work much more together in future than in the past, where, as was said earlier, every 3 months we have a meeting. No, that's over. Yes, you may have a formal meeting every 3 months, and I think there will be more and more, not just quarterly meeting. Even for smaller companies, I see this happening when I have a board member on small companies at the COVID time. So more and more, but these meetings are not just for control, they are for understanding, explaining, and sharing the difficulties, the success, the problem, the failures, as was said. So I see this as a more cooperative world. Maybe I'm too optimistic, but I see this as a cooperative world between boards, executives, shareholders, stakeholders.
Thank you, Michel. Is anyone or someone who wants to reflect on Michel's observation or statements? You were very convincing, Michel. And again, you mentioned the word balance. I guess this is really also the essence of governance, and there's balancing and trying to align potential conflicting interests, and it's more prominent coming between the shareholders and the stakeholders. Maybe let me tackle one of the points that has been raised before in this session this afternoon, on the importance of having common values and a common vision. May I turn to Torben? Torben, how can the board protect these values, or what should be the role of the board be in this perspective, in this respect?
Well, thank you, first of all, for two very good case descriptions. I was also very impressed and happy to hear about these two very authentic descriptions from Marie and from Mathieu. When I reflect on the afternoon here, to me, every company is always, every organization is always on the move. It's dynamic, like a pendulum. It's moving from centralization to decentralization. And sometimes in a period of time, there's more fashion in being decentralized and less hierarchical, and other times it may be the opposite. So I think the board's function is, of course, getting more complex, because the oversight, or you can call it control with Ludger, but the oversight role, in my opinion, is of course directed in two directions. One is, you can say, upwards towards the shareholders, towards the stakeholders, and if it's a private company, towards the family members or family shareholders. And I highly sympathize with all the complexity that Mathieu has been going through. If I had been on a board in that constellation, I would early on have been pointing to this completely dysfunctional family setup that is meant to fail in that situation. And I think it's a board obligation for the independent board members to point to such early signs of sickness in the system before we have a sad departure of a person who's been fighting a lot for that company. So upwards, there is a lot of synchronization or alignment tasks for this board control role. And if you look at it towards the organization below the board, I think the demands are also increasing very much, because this journey of the pendulum from central to decentralized, as we have seen in Mercuri Urval and other companies, I think it's so important that the board is close to the culture and close to the internal behavior. And as someone earlier referred to the fact that in a decentralized organization, the board will see more members of the management team, which is a good way to measure. And also for the board to detect, are there misalignment? Are there early signs of egotism or early signs of kingdoms or lack of transparency or wrong values? And there the board has to be very close to the company and have the antennas to not only understand financial numbers and metrics, which has been so common these days, but indeed also to understand, let's say, cultural metrics, if you can use that word, to understand early on what is dysfunctional here in the organization potentially, which can kill the journey of this pendulum at this moment. And I think pointing its fingers to the dysfunctionality in the shareholding area, family area, as well as in the organization downwards, I think is a very important extra complexity to the board's task. It's not enough just to say, tick some points of compliance or tick some financial guidance procedural processes around that. It is indeed now important to find out, is the morale of this organization intact? Are we just talking about CRS? Are we talking about sustainability? Are we living it in fact? And these more soft matters, I think, are increasingly important. Whether the organization is less or more or less hierarchical, basically it swings over time. But fundamentally, I think it's a task adding to the board's capability to see these kind of early signs, either upstairs or downstairs, signs of deterioration, because it's always deteriorating. You just don't know where it's happening. So you have to be very alert as a board to these kind of dysfunctions. I think those were the key reflections that I took away from this afternoon.
Thank you, Torben. May I ask Paula to step in this discussion, because we here also Torben mentioned the board should be close to the people. We heard several times the empowerment of the employees. We heard from Marie, it's all about the people. So how should the board deal with the human capital strategy in this perspective?
Okay, Abigail. Well, first point I want to make is that the board has to deal with it, because HR strategy is key, and more broadly speaking, human capital strategy is key. But unfortunately, the CEOs are very jealous about their staff, and they still think that human capital and human resources management is only their business. And so they are not willing to share it with the board. I think that this sort of impasse should be overcome, because I mean, not only flat organizations, but in all organizations which wants to survive in a fast changing environment, have to take care of their HR strategy at the top level of the company. So the board should, in my view, take the leadership about HR strategy. How could it do that? Well, first, it may seem obvious, but I think it's not, because it has to speak about strategy in a broader and wider way. It has to take the time to speak about strategy without having a strict agenda on it. So without having to approve the business plan in the same meeting. What very often occurs actually. So the board should take the time, maybe in specific meetings, dedicated meetings, to meet with external experts and to discuss how how the human capital management could be linked with the long-term strategic goals. Long-term means everything, we know, and nothing, okay? So there must not be a sort of constraint relating to the time horizon covered by the business plan. Because usually what we see in business plan is that the goals is set in terms of how much and how far headcount is increased or reduced. We rarely see qualitative, let's say, guidelines relating to the human resource strategy. So I think that really the board should ask itself whether they are, for instance, hiring the right people with the right skills in order to be able to face the future risks and the future challenges. Not whether they are hiring more women or more boys or whatsoever. And to do this, the board needs to share a multi-scenario analysis. I mean, which involves a lot of variables, a lot of items, a lot of arguments. It can't do that during the board meeting, where it has a time constraints, of course. Again, there are, beyond this, there are some key processes which I think can add up a lot to the board managing and leading the human resource strategy, which are, of course, first of all, the succession planning activity. So succession planning should also be based on a scenario analysis, long-term scenario analysis, as long as it is needed, depending on the business of the company and on the risks it faces. This succession plan should be closely linked to the strategy, to strategic goals, and again to the relating risks and challenges. And the succession planning must not, succession planning discussed by the board must not be focused on the CEO only. It has to be extended to the C-suite, for instance, and to middle management or middle managers of key functions. The second process, which should be monitored by the board and if needed, I mean, under the control of the board, is the selection process. Again, not only the selection of new board members, but the criteria for the selection of the new staff. So this is also linked to the intellectual capital, the development of the intellectual capital and the development of innovation skills. So I think the selection criteria should be revised by the board and approved by the board. As for board members, of course, I think the key question is whether there is a market for board members. And of course, I refer here to independent, non-executive board members, because my impression is that still, let's say, personal relationships are what count the most. And of course, we don't deny the fact that we have to trust people, to trust new board members. But I think that we are not looking enough for new skills and for the relevant skills we need to implement a certain business plan. Which could be these new skills, I mean, pursued in order to complete the board composition, to have the right skill mix within the board? Well, first of all, crisis management skills. What we saw during the COVID crisis, what we are still seeing, is that most board members are afraid They are afraid because they think about their responsibilities and they want to get the maximum of assurance from the structure that they are safe in this sense, that they don't risk anything individually. And I don't think that's the right mood, no, for a board member. I think that a board member must be able to take the risk it considers to be appropriate in a certain situation. So I think that only people who already faced a deep crisis can add value in such a situation. And then, of course, we need new skills such as IT skills. And you know that IT experts are very rarely appointed as board members because it's considered to be a very specific skill. So it did never happen to me to have a colleague director with IT skills, with true IT skills or skills in digitalization or experience in digitalization, which is a pity, I think. And so we always have to rely on external consultants for that. And I also think that we need a higher turnover rate of board members because members fall in love immediately. I'm, of course, referring mostly to large corporations, so to large listed companies. And we know that when we are appointed as board member of a large listed company, our status immediately increases. So we are proud to have been appointed in such a role. And we fall in love with all the people we meet in this, now virtually, but previously physical board meetings. And so this reduces the turnover of board members. I think that's really, I mean, a bad practice. So I think we should increase the turnover. We should, of course, increase diversity further, not only in terms of gender, but also in terms of age. We have our board members, again, relating to listed companies, large corporations, are too old. The average age is still 59 years, and it changed over the last 10 years from 61 to 59, so not a very relevant change. If we see younger board members only in startups, and that's a pity because we know that, I mean, startups are potentially our future, whereas traditional corporations may not exist any longer in 5 or 10 years' time. So I think an increase in turnover, a maximum tenure should be set, and a higher level of diversity should be pursued in the board. But
thank you,
again,
Paola.
the main question is whether there is a market for such skills. So whether shareholders want to have active and skilled and so courageous board members or not.
Thank you, Paola. You provided us with already some additional ingredients or recipes for success, if I may put it that way, that also be valuable for new organizational models. Can I turn to Roger? We've already, of course, heard a lot of important recipes or success factors. Any other that you would like to add from your large experience as a governance expert?
You know, when I observe these discussions about decentralized organizations, it's interesting because on the one hand, it seems such a new concept, doesn't it? It's sort of modern, progressive way of organizing organizations. But it seems to me that in many respects, we're trying to get back to something we've lost from the past, which is the notion of partnership, you know, which is the way in which we organized business activity historically. And we want to get back to that personal accountability, that sense of ownership, that sense that we're not just a cog in the wheel, that each individual is somehow important and empowered. But of course, we bid farewell to that land of lost content, so to speak, because I suppose as organizations became larger, more complex, the inherent riskiness of that type of model became too great. And we of course then have moved to the limited liability company and modern organizations. But of course that has just shifted the locus of responsibility and liability to the board of directors. And here I think, coming back to a point that Paula touched on, we do have an obstacle here to the flatter, more decentralized organization. Although we as boards may think it makes sense from a management point of view to pursue that approach, from a pure legal point of view, it's still us that are still responsible. This small group of people at the apex of the organization. And as organizations get larger and larger across geographical boundaries, they become much more complex. This is a huge concern for those small group of individuals who are legally liable. They feel as if the whole situation is slipping out of their control, and they're going to be ultimately left to be responsible for situations which they have no direct control over. So I think that, as Paula says, that is what has led to, so to speak, the development of a hierarchical organization with a modern control structure. So this is a real obstacle. What I've taken away from our case studies is that, the first one, and this I took away from the Mercury Urval study, is that even if you try to decentralize, there still is a need there for quite a lot of, should we say, central apparatus. The central apparatus about defining the purpose and goals of the organization, setting policies, having a kind of underlying framework of risk oversight and risk management. Because ultimately that's a consequence of having liability remaining with the board of directors. So there's going to probably needs to be some kind of hybrid structure which combines decentralization at one level with sort of a corporate centralization at another. Another observation I take from our case studies is that decentralization requires a certain type of person working within it to be successful. That doesn't suit everybody. A lot of people get very uncomfortable if they're given a lot of responsibility, and they don't want to accept that liability, and it may actually make them very dissatisfied when they feel that perhaps others are abrogating their responsibility and placing it onto them. And I observe this actually at the moment in the IOD, where we're trying to decentralize the IOD and put much more power back in the hands of members. And you would think that members would say, this is wonderful, thank you very much for empowering us. But actually they're sort of turning to the central organization and saying, well, we can't be responsible for this. What are you going to do? What are you actually going to do in order to help us fulfill this role? So I think, it is a big issue. So simply saying we're going to decentralize, we're going to hand over power to people at a local level, it needs to be thought through very carefully. And perhaps the ultimate question we need to answer is, if we're going to hand power and authority to people, perhaps what needs to go with that as well is genuine responsibility. And I'm not just talking about responsibility in a kind of a, if you don't perform, you're going to be out, you're going to be fired, or you're not going to get a large bonus. But I'm thinking more at a legal level in terms of ultimate liability. And so maybe we need to match this decentralized business structure. We need to think more carefully about our corporate legal forms. Are they, as they currently exist, appropriate for this particular purpose? Thank you, Abby.
Thank you, Roger, for these wise words. And let me actually ask the question to our delegate from the insurance company, Nima. From an insurance perspective, do you see that different governance structures or different organizational models elevates the exposure for liability claims and fraud, as was already here also raised?
Yes, hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, sure.
Perfect. Yeah, so absolutely. I mean, we see trends, on the claim side. So between centralized and decentralized organizations. So one example would be if you look at, criminal activity in companies, I like fraud by employees, etc. I think it's reasonable if you look at the stats to believe that, in decentralized organizations, I think they are more exposed to fraud than centralized. And the reason is that, being a decentralized organization with management in local subsidiaries, they're usually more empowered and have more mandate to run the operation. So with little or less involvement from or oversight from HQ. So you could see that fraud in subsidiaries by higher management people is more frequent than in more centralized organization. But then you also have more unintentional things. So if you look at cyber and so IT security and cyber, which is a hot topic right now in the media. And then if you think you have a decentralized organization with quite a lot of mandates locally in the subsidiaries, and let's assume that the subsidiary, they purchased a software or a system and installed that, and it hasn't gone through the, the diligent IT security due diligence from the HQ, maybe from the parent company. That could allow, for example, we've seen several examples where that allows hackers to enter a weak point, get access to the company, and from there they can get access to, more servers or the big servers at the HQ. So that's also one of the exposures we see. And I think on director side, if you look at directors and officers, and most of you know about directors and officers liability insurance that's in the market and has been for many, many years. But if you look at the last 5-10 years, you could really see an uptick in antitrust claims. So let's take bribery and corruption, right? And not seldom these occur in remote subsidiaries, in decentralized organizations with high local empowerment, because there you have, sometimes we've seen that you have one or a few employees that use illegal means to win a big contract without the involvement of the headquarters. And obviously here in decentralized organizations, it's very important that you have a non-tolerance culture, you have proper oversight, through frequent internal and external audits. You have, robust whistleblower hotlines in place, and obviously that from the group and from the top all the way down to the bottom, you have continuous training for the whole organization, just to raise awareness around these issues because they are real. And we really see an uptick in these types of claims reported by our clients to us as an insurance company.
Thank you, very interesting. I turn to the audience. Anyone who wants to respond or react on what we've heard from the previous participants?
Yes.
Yes, Michel.
Yes.
Please.
Yeah, I just want to. Well, I cannot have a video. Anyway, doesn't matter. You hear me?
Yes, clear,
okay.
Loud and clear.
Okay. So I think I want to raise two or three main points from what has been said just before, which is, yeah, I have a video, I think now. Okay. From what has been said, especially by Paola, I would say the key word for me is diversity. Diversity in every organization within the company, whether it's the board, the executive committee, all the committees, the people, the country managers, whoever. And diversity is not just gender. Gender diversity is one angle. It's very important because it brings a new dimension, obviously. But diversity means the widest possible diversity in expertise, experience, culture, behaviors, gender, origins, education, etc., is important. And the other point, referring to what has just been said, is now a corporation is the entire activity of a group, is the entire group. The smallest subsidiary or joint venture is in the most remote place, is part of the group and can be a risky operation in itself, especially on the mediatic or human rights or whatever. So the group now, whatever the legal, purely legal aspects, in terms of governance and overall image of the company, its entire activities need to be part of the game. And they need to follow similar rules, similar goals, and fit with the values of the group. So that's very important, because in the past we tended to say, well, this is a small joint venture somewhere, we are not accountable for it. Especially if we have 49% of a very small activity somewhere. But these days, with the media, the digital world, everything is known or can be known at any time. And I think it's a message for the longer term. The groups are becoming, is becoming the entirety of the activities and of its people. And all the institutions in governance terms need to have diversity. And diversity, I come back to what Paula said, also means turnover. Because you cannot stay, even if you stay in a job, you are an expert, but if you stay forever in the same job, this is not diversity.
I fully agree, Michel. Keeping track of the time, can I turn to David? You were also the first to switch on your video and facing this paradigm of reconciling the legal rules and framework with this new business model. Can we have your point of view on this as well?
Thank you. I'll speak from a North American perspective, because I think here we're still on the old model. There's no question that we are more shareholder-based than stakeholder-based, and will remain so. In spite of the attestations of the Business Roundtable, 180 CEOs saying that the world was a broader place than the corporation's next quarter profits. That's what they say, but as we say here, white man speaks with forked tongue. So the model is not changed. I think we're very authoritarian. You can see that in terms of the presidency of the United States at the moment. You can see that in terms of the references made to Steve Jobs, Jamie Dimon, before him, Jack Welch. Leaders do still lead in this environment over here, whatever the new paradigms. And I think in a way, I teach startup governance with the Stanford Business School, and they've been doing startup governance for about a decade now. And in many ways, we get rid of the agency problem to some extent. But what we never got rid of is the degrees of freedom of investment going forward. And that really does require a strong single leader, even if the execution is done through a horizontal decentralized organization. The largest single company in the world in terms of tracking where vehicles are and what's happening to them, it's called Geotab. It's run right here out of Toronto. And they have a man who founded it and runs it and manages it in a flat structure. So he doesn't even have an office, he just goes in. But the decision-making on where Geotab is going to reinvest is all at the end of the day made by Neil. So the new digital world kind of implies a flat organization, coders working away in their own rooms, talking to each other over lunch or breakfast or dinner, bringing the new AI machine learning stuff to the fore and creating new customer shareholder value through that. Still requires a huge amount of executive authority at the end of the day to determine what the investment decision making is going to be. And what does that do for the governance and the board level? Well, it all depends. I think it's so contextually related. Mathieu ended up being sacrificed on the cross of his family's burdens. And Marie Bernard, I'm not sure how that's going to end up. Some human resource companies are still in the principalate monarchistic system. Others have democratized. So it's contextually dependent. But the one thing I would stress and that I continually worry about is these points made by Michel and Paola about diversity at the board level. There is one example of a major corporation in America who has diversified age-wise, which I think has been quite fundamental to their success and their future, and that's Walmart. And Walmart decided that its principal competitor was Amazon. And so in its skills matrix, it said we have to have talent around the boardroom table to oversight and help guide strategy that understands where Amazon is going and what it's meaning. So there's now 43 40-year-old non-executive directors of Walmart. 75 of the largest 250 corporations in the United States have spun off incubators of their own, quite outside the corporate system. Now, how are they governed and how the oversight occurs on those, because they're not part of any bureaucracy at all, is a hugely challenging problem. So diversity in terms of age and turnover, to get away from the fact that in North America, the average director is over 62. So it's gone the other way here, I think is a hugely important governance consideration going forward. But we're not going flat in North America. That'd be my bottom line. And we're hierarchical. We're going to stay there. We have a cult of leadership. We revere the great gods of business, Jack Welch, Stephen Jobs, Jamie Dimon, and that's never going to end. So thank you. Thanks, Abby.
Thank you, David. That is a very strong closing phrase. If I look at my watch, we have already come to the end of the session. I would like to thank our speakers, Marie Bernard and Mathieu. I also would like to thank all of you of being so disciplined and making my job easier in moderating the dialogue, and also for this interesting and inspiring contribution of each of you. I wish you all the best. Unless Beatrice has some closing words from ecoDa to share.
Well, Abigail, I just want to thank you for a smooth interaction that you have made during this dialogue. Thank you very much, and thank you to all of you.
Thank you. See you in the near future, and wish you all the best and keep safe in this still ongoing COVID times. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Abby.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you very much, Abby.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you very much to everybody.